The wet wool of my trench coat smelled like the subway, and the rejection pile on my desk looked taller than it had any right to be at 11 p.m. I sat in my office, the only light coming from the street lamps reflecting off the wet pavement 3 stories down. It was Tuesday, a time when decent people were sleeping, and literary agents were drinking cold coffee to figure out why the third act of a memoir wasn't working. My eyes burned when I blinked, and the red pen left a crooked line across the contract, like my hand had forgotten how to be steady. The radiator in the corner clanked and hissed, a dying mechanical beast that provided more noise than heat. I spun my chair around to check on the only thing that mattered. Mia, my 6-year-old niece, was asleep on the worn leather office couch. She was buried under my spare coat, her small hand clutching a stuffed penguin. Her breathing was a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the rain lashing against the window. I watched her for a moment, the familiar pressure tightening my chest. The orthodontist bill was sitting on my desk under a pile of query letters, and the landlord had already emailed about the January rent hike. I needed a win, and I needed it fast. I picked up my red pen, hovering over a contract for a mid-list thriller. The advance was insulting. I needed to fight for more, but my phone battery was dead, and so was my patience. Then, the outer door of the agency banged open like a dropped tray in an empty hall. I jumped, my pen skidding across the page. Mia stirred, murmuring something about marshmallows in her sleep, but she didn't wake. I stood up, adrenaline spiking, ready to tell off a drunk or a lost delivery driver. But standing in my doorway was a hurricane in a chef's coat. It was Oaklee Torres. I knew who she was. Everyone in the city knew who she was. She was the executive chef of Torres Table, the legendary restaurant downtown that her father had built. She was usually polished, appearing in magazines with perfect lighting and a garnish of microgreens. Tonight, she looked like a catastrophe. She was soaking wet, her dark hair plastered to her skull. There was a streak of flour across her cheek, and her chef's coat was stained with what looked like a reduction sauce. She was clutching a stack of legal documents against her chest, the paper damp and crinkled. She was vibrating, a high-frequency tremor of pure panic. She looked at me, then at the sleeping child, then back at me. She didn't say hello. She didn't apologize for the intrusion. "I need a husband," she announced, her voice cracking on the last syllable. "By tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., or they take the restaurant." I blinked once slow because the sentence didn't fit in the room with a sleeping child. "Oaklee," I said, keeping my voice low. "This is the Baker Literary Agency. We do books. Marriages and divorces are down the hall at the courthouse. The clerk opens at 8. I don't need a clerk, Azai. And I don't need a real husband." She marched into the room, bringing the smell of rain and expensive vanilla with her. She slammed the damp papers onto my desk, right on top of the thriller contract. "I need a placeholder. A suit. Someone who can stand next to me and look like they aren't going to steal the silverware." I looked down at the documents. It was a trust agreement, thick, dense, and full of aggressive, bold fonts. "My father's trust," she said, her finger shaking as she pointed to a paragraph on page 40. "The succession clause." I finally read the fine print. "In the event of the primary beneficiary's 30th birthday, full ownership of the property and assets transfers only if said beneficiary is in a recognized domestic partnership or marriage. Otherwise, control reverts to the Board of Trustees." "And the board?" I asked, picking up my glasses. "The board is led by a man named Sterling who thinks culinary arts is a waste of prime real estate. He wants to sell the building to a condo developer. They're auditing the trust tomorrow morning. If I show up single, I lose the building. I lose the kitchen. I lose everything my dad built." "You're 38, I noted, scanning the legal jargon. "Why is this coming up now?" "Because the grace period expires tomorrow. 10 years. I had 10 years to settle down, and I spent 10 years chopping onions and balancing ledgers instead." She ran a hand through her wet hair. "I forgot about the clause. I thought the work was enough." She looked at me. Her eyes were dark, terrified, and desperate. I knew that look. It was the look of an author who had written a masterpiece but lost the file before hitting save. It was the look of someone watching their legacy burn. "Why me?" I asked, leaning back against the edge of my desk. "We've met twice. I sold you a coffee table book 3 years ago that went out of print. Because you're the only man I know who can read a contract in under 5 minutes and find a loophole, she said. She glanced at Mia on the couch, her expression softening for a fraction of a second. And I saw you at the park last week. With her? You were fixing her bike chain. You looked reliable. You looked like a dad. I'm a dad, I said, correcting her automatically. Or close enough. I'm her guardian. Exactly. You have tired but responsible written all over you. That's what the board needs to see. Stability. I looked at Mia. I looked at the rain hitting the window. If I called a lawyer, we'd lose hours we didn't have, and I didn't have the money for a midnight retainer anyway. I needed this win as much as she did. I charge a retainer, I said, my voice rough. I'll cook for you, she countered immediately. For life. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever you want. I don't need food, Oaklee. I have a 6-year-old who needs braces and a rent hike coming in January. If I save your restaurant, we launch a new cookbook series, The Legacy of Torres. I get 15% of the advance and the royalties, and I get creative control over the narrative. She blinked. A cookbook? I don't have time to write a book. You don't write it? You cook it. I write it. I frame it. We sell the story of the restaurant to save the restaurant. I stood up, capping the pen with a decisive click. The husband part is optics only. The real deal is the book and the business plan. We're going to rewrite this narrative before Sterling can close the book. The next morning, the rain had settled into a gray, miserable drizzle. We walked into the boardroom of Torres Table, located on the top floor above the dining room. The room smelled of lemon polish and impending foreclosure. The lawyers were sharks in gray suits. Sterling sat at the head of the table, a man who looked like he had been born wearing a tie. He checked his watch as we entered. I was wearing my best suit, the navy one I saved for auction wars with the Big Five publishers. It was slightly tight in the shoulders, but it made me look broader, sharper. I held Oaklee's hand. Her palm was sweating, cold, and clammy. Gentlemen, I said, projecting the voice I used to terrify junior editors who tried to cut my clients' word counts. I'm Azai Baker, Miss Torres's partner. Sterling looked up, his eyes narrowing behind rimless glasses. Partner? We have no record of a relationship, Miss Torres. The private investigator's report lists you as single. We're private people, I said smoothly, pulling out a chair for Oaklee. We prefer to keep our personal life separate from the brand. But, as you can see, I gestured to the ring on her finger. It was a prop ring from a local theater production of The Great Gatsby, borrowed from a costume designer friend an hour ago in exchange for a favor. It looked gaudy and fake up close, but from a distance, under the boardroom lights, it sparkled with enough authority to cast a shadow. This is highly irregular, Sterling muttered, shuffling papers. The clause stipulates a recognized domestic partnership. A ring is not a contract. What is irregular? I interrupted, leaning forward and placing my hand flat on the mahogany table. Is your interpretation of Clause 40B? I pulled out the document Oaklee had brought me, now marked up in red ink. Domestic partnership, I quoted from memory, is defined in this trust as a shared commitment to the future viability of the family assets. It does not explicitly specify a marriage license, nor does it specify a timeline of cohabitation. It specifies intent and shared burden. I pulled out the revised business plan I had drafted at 3 a.m. on my kitchen counter, while Mia ate cereal. Furthermore, I continued, sliding the folder across the table, Miss Torres and I are not just partners in life. We are partners in this brand. We are launching a definitive cookbook series, The Legacy of Torres. It captures the history of this building, the recipes, and the future. We have letters of intent from 3 major distributors pending review. The projected revenue from the advance alone covers the current operating deficit. It wasn't secured yet, but I knew which editors to call, and I knew how fast a real offer could move if the story was strong. Oaklee stared at me. She didn't break character. She straightened her spine, channeling every ounce of her executive chef authority. That's right, she said, her voice finding its steel. Azai manages the business narrative. I manage the food. We are a team, and we are not selling. The lawyers exchanged looks. They whispered. And more importantly, they didn't want to fight a public PR battle against a beloved local couple trying to save a landmark. The optics would be terrible. Fine, Sterling said, closing his folder with a snap. We'll grant a 6-week extension. We need to verify the partnership and the financial viability of this book deal. If the revenue isn't secure and the debts aren't cleared by the annual gala dinner, the building is sold. No more extensions. We walked out. We kept our heads high until the elevator doors closed. As soon as the metal box started to descend, Oaklee slumped against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. She buried her face in her hands. "Oh my God," she breathed. "I thought I was going to throw up." "We bought 6 weeks," I said, loosening my tie. "We lied," she whispered. "We don't have a book. We don't have pre-orders. We don't have distributors." "Not yet," I said. I offered her a hand to pull her up. Her grip was strong, calloused from years of knife work. "But you can cook, and I can sell ice to a polar bear if the query letter is good enough." "Get up, Mrs. Baker. We have work to do." The marriage was the easy part. The restaurant was the problem. I spent the next 3 days auditing Torres Table, and it was a disaster. Day 1 was a wake-up call. The walk-in fridge was disorganized, the staff schedule was a mess of overtime, and Carlos, the sous chef, looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Beautiful food, terrible logistics. The menu was 20 pages long, a sprawling, incoherent novel of dishes that required too much prep and too much inventory. I set up a temporary office in the dry storage room, flanked by 50-pound sacks of flour and shelves of smoked paprika. It smelled of dust and potential. "You need to cut the menu," I said on day 3. I walked into the kitchen during prep, holding a spreadsheet that bled red ink. "You're losing money on every sea bass you serve. The sourcing cost is too high, and the prep time is 40 minutes. "My father created that dish," Oaklee shouted, slamming a stock pot onto the stove. Steam hissed from the dish pit, knives clattered against cutting boards, and the sous chefs kept their heads down, terrified. "It's the signature. I can't cut it." "You're not cooking for your father, Oaklee. He's gone. You're cooking for the bank?" She spun on me, a chef's knife in her hand. She set it down hard on the cutting board, a sharp thud that silenced the station, and glared at me. "You don't understand passion, Azai. You just understand paper. This is food. It's emotional. It's memory. I understand that if you don't cut the sea bass, you won't have a kitchen to have passion in," I countered, my voice calm, contrasting her fire. "I understand that you haven't paid your produce vendor in 60 days? I walked over to her station. "Look at you," I said softly. She was trembling. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands were red and chapped. "You're exhausted," I said. "You're doing the prep work, the line cooking, the ordering, and the payroll. You're trying to be the CEO and the sous chef and the daughter all at once. You're drowning." "I have to do it," she said, her voice trembling. "Let it fall," I said. "Then we build it back better. Smaller. Sharper. You keep the soul, but you lose the weight." I pulled a metal stool over from the prep table. "Sit." "I can't sit." "Sit." It was the dad voice, the tone I used when Mia refused to put on her shoes. It wasn't angry, but it was immovable. She sat. She looked small on the stool, surrounded by the stainless steel machinery of her life. "I'm going to finish the inventory count," I said. "You are going to sit there and drink a glass of water." "Why does it matter?" She looked at me, confused. "Why?" "Because that's the book," I said. "People don't buy recipes. They can get recipes on the internet. They buy stories. They buy you. Tell me the story." She took a sip of water. She started to talk. She told me about her dad fishing in the rain off the pier when she was 10, about how he taught her to scale a fish without tearing the skin. As she spoke, the tension left her shoulders. Her face softened. The frantic energy dissolved into something warmer, sadder, and more real. I watched her. I took notes in my black notebook, and for the first time, I wasn't just fixing a problem. I was listening to a person. The lines started to blur. I couldn't afford a babysitter every night, and Oaklee needed me at the restaurant to handle the business partner optics. So, I started bringing Mia to the restaurant after school. I expected Oaklee to be annoyed. Kitchens are dangerous places for 6-year-olds. But she surprised me. She cleared a corner in the pastry station, away from the heat and the knives. She put down a rubber mat and gave Mia a ball of dough. The flour fort, Oaklee called it. I watched them one rainy afternoon from the doorway of my storage closet office. The kitchen was in a lull between lunch and dinner service. The lights were dimmed. Oaklee was teaching Mia how to knead dough. She was patient, her hands guiding Mia's small fingers, showing her how to push and fold. "You have to be firm," Oaklee was saying. "But not mean. The dough knows if you're angry." Mia giggled, her nose dusted with white flour. "Does the dough have feelings?" "Everything has feelings if you pay attention," Oaklee said. She laughed, a sound I hadn't heard before. It wasn't the frantic, stressed laugh of the first night. It was rich and warm, like yeast rising in a warm room. "She likes you," I said, leaning against the doorframe. Oaklee looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. "She's easy to like. She's smart. She asks good questions. She misses having a mom," I said. The words slipped out before I could stop them. It wasn't something I told people. It was a private ache I managed with distractions and toys. Oaklee stopped kneading. She looked at Mia, who was happily punching the dough, then at me. "And you?" "I miss the team," I admitted, looking at the floor. "The backup. Being a single dad. It's just you against the world. You have to be the bad cop and the good cop, the nurse and the teacher. There's no one to tag in when you're tired." "I know," she said quietly. "I feel that with this place. Everyone looks to me for the answer. If the roof leaks, it's me. If the sauce breaks, it's me. It's lonely at the pass." She walked over to where I was standing. She smelled of vanilla, rosemary, and hard work. She reached out and brushed a smudge of blue ink off my cheek, a hazard of my trade. "Tag me in," she whispered. "I'm good at heavy lifting. Let me help with Mia while you work on the contracts. We're partners, remember?" It was a small moment, a gesture of solidarity. But it felt like the earth shifted a few degrees on its axis. That night, my phone buzzed at 2 a.m. It was a credit card alert. Printing services $10,000. I confirmed the charge, my thumb hesitating for only a second. Then I texted my contact at the artisanal press downtown. "I need a rush job. Hardcover. 50 copies. By Friday." 3 weeks in, the manuscript was done. We sent it to a few friendly editors I knew. The buzz was starting a whisper campaign about the Torres comeback. The restaurant was busier. The menu was shorter. The costs were down. We were winning. Then the letter arrived. I found it in the mail pile on a Tuesday morning. A thick, cream-colored envelope with the seal of the publisher, the corporate entity holding the trust on behalf of the board. It was a cease and desist, or rather, a notice of breach. Breach of contract. Clause 40B. Section 2. Investigation reveals Mr. Baker maintains a separate residence at 404 East Pine. Cohabitation is a requirement of the Domestic Partnership Clause. Surveillance confirms lack of overnight presence. "They're watching us," Oaklee said, reading the letter over my shoulder. Her hands shook, rattling the paper. "They know you don't live here. They know you go home to your apartment every night." "They're bluffing," I said, trying to sound confident, though my stomach dropped. "They're trying to scare us into settling." "They're not. Look," she pointed out the window of the storage room. A black sedan was parked across the street, 2 men in the front seat. Watching. "They want the land," she whispered. "They don't care about the book. They don't care about the profit. They want to prove we're fake so they can evict me and bulldoze the building. Then we make it real," I said. She looked at me. "What?" "Cohabitation," I said. "I move in. Tonight. Me and Mia. My lease is month to month anyway. I pack up. We move into the apartment above the restaurant. If they want a show, we give them a show." "Azai, you can't uproot your child for a lie. That's insane." "It's not a lie anymore," I said, meeting her gaze. "We're partners. We save the business." I move into the guest room. We put Mia's drawings on the fridge. We walk out the front door together every morning. She stared at me. "You do that? For a client?" "For a partner, I corrected. I told you. I'm not going anywhere. That night, I packed 2 bags and a box of toys. Mia thought it was an adventure. Are we going to live in the castle with the good smells? She asked. Ideally, yes, I said, buckling her into the car seat. If we can keep the dragons away. Living together was dangerous. Not physically, but emotionally. The apartment above the restaurant was small. Intimate. It smelled of whatever was cooking downstairs. It forced a proximity that stripped away the professional armor we had both been wearing. I saw Oaklee in the morning, hair messy, drinking coffee in an oversized t-shirt, looking soft and vulnerable. She saw me wrestling Mia into her school uniform, losing my patience, looking like the tired, overwhelmed dad I really was. The fake aspect started to dissolve. We developed a rhythm. I made coffee. She made breakfast, which was always spectacular. I handled the invoices. She handled the prep. We shared the bathroom schedule. One night, a massive storm knocked out the power grid in the neighborhood. The restaurant went dark. The walk-in fridges were on backup generators, but the lights were out. We were upstairs in the living room, lighting candles. The rain lashed against the windows. Mia was asleep in the guest room, exhausted from a day of school. I'm scared, Oaklee said. She was sitting on the floor rug, hugging her knees. The candlelight cast dancing shadows on her face. The gala is in 2 weeks. If the book deal doesn't come through, if they expose us, I lose everything. And I drag you down with me. They won't, I said, sitting beside her on the rug. How do you know? Sterling is ruthless. Because the story is good, I said. And the food is better. And because I checked the bylaws. Even if they prove we weren't living together before, the clause is vague about the start date. Possession is 9/10 of the law. And right now, my toothbrush is in your bathroom. She turned to me. The candlelight flickered in her eyes. It's not just the business, Azai. It's us. I'm getting used to you being here. To Mia, being here, the apartment feels full. We're getting used to it too. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I stiffened for a second, then relaxed. I put my arm around her. It felt natural, too natural, like a piece of a puzzle snapping into place. I don't want you to be a fake husband, she whispered. I know. I want. She stopped. What do you want, Oaklee? I want to not be tired anymore. I want to stop fighting alone. I turned my head. My lips brushed her forehead, a gentle, fatherly gesture that somehow felt like a promise. Rest, I said. I got the watch. I'll handle the dragons. She fell asleep on my shoulder. I didn't move for 3 hours. I just watched the rain and thought about how much it would hurt when this contract ended and I had to pack up my bags again. The gala dinner. The deadline. The restaurant was packed. Critics, investors, the board. It was the night that would decide the fate of Torres Table. The room was buzzing. Sterling, the lawyer, was there, sitting at the center table, looking like he smelled something rotten. He had a notepad and a pen, ready to document every failure. Oaklee was in the kitchen, commanding the line. She was in her element, a general leading troops. I was front of house, playing the charismatic husband, manager, shaking hands, pouring wine, selling the narrative of the power couple. The service was flawless. The sea bass now served as a special, limited run with a story printed on the menu was perfect. The guests were raving. Then, disaster. The fire alarm tripped. Not a fire, a sensor malfunction in the basement due to the humidity. But the system was automated. The sprinklers kicked on in the dining room. Hisses. Water rained down on the guests, on the food, on the critics. Chaos. Guests screaming, grabbing their coats. The food was ruined. The ambiance was destroyed. Sterling stood up, soaked, a triumphant grin on his face. This is it, he shouted over the alarm. Negligence. Failure to maintain the property. The trust is void. Clause 12. Maintenance of standards. You've failed, miss. Torres. Oaklee ran out of the kitchen, her chef's white spotless, staring in horror at the ruined dining room. She looked at Sterling. She looked at the water pooling on the floor. She looked defeated. I stepped up. I didn't hesitate. I caught the eye of Carlos, the sous chef, who was by the panel. He nodded and slammed the manual override, killing the water. I grabbed a chair and stood on it. "Quiet!" I roared. It was my literary agent voice, the voice I used to silence bidding wars. The crowd looked at me. "This building is old," I said, my voice echoing in the wet silence. "It has quirks. It has history. Just like the food. Just like this city." I pointed to Oaklee. "This woman," I said, "has poured her soul into these walls. Negligence is ignoring the heart of this community for a profit margin. We live in Seattle. We know rain." I pulled a document from my inside jacket pocket. It was damp, but legible. "And regarding the trust, Mr. Sterling," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "in the event of infrastructure malfunction or system failure, the beneficiary has 30 days to remediate before forfeiture. This is a plumbing failure, Sterling. We have 30 days, and we're not going anywhere." I stepped down and slammed the paper onto his wet table. Then, the coup de grace. The front doors opened. A delivery man walked in with a hand truck, looking confused by the wet guests. "Delivery," he said. "Rush order. First print run. For Miss Torres." He wheeled in a pallet of books. The Legacy of Torres. I ripped open a box. I grabbed a book. Hardcover. Glossy. Beautiful. "And we have the capital to fix the plumbing," I announced. "Because the distributor's letter of intent hit my inbox this afternoon, unlocking our bridge financing." It was a bold move, backed by the very real offer I had finalized on my phone in the kitchen an hour ago. "Everyone gets a copy," I said. "On the house. Complimentary with your shower." The room went silent. Then, someone started clapping. Then everyone. Sterling looked at the book. He looked at the crowd. He looked at Oaklee, who was staring at me like I had just invented the sun. He picked up his briefcase. "You have 30 days, he hissed. But he walked out. We had won. The cleanup took all night. We were sitting on the wet floor of the dining room at 4 a.m. The staff had gone home. Mia was asleep upstairs. We were sharing a bottle of expensive red wine that had survived the deluge. "You printed the books," she said, running her hand over the cover. "You paid for them." "I believed in the story," I said. "You risked your credit score. You risked your rent. I've risked more for less." She crawled over to me. She took the wine glass from my hand and set it down on the floor. "You saved me," she said. "I just read the fine print." "No," she said fiercely. "You saved me, not the restaurant. Me. You stood up there and you fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." She cupped my face. Her hands were warm. "I don't want a fake husband, Azai. I don't want a business partner. I'm done with the contract. What do you want?" "I want the guy who reads to my niece. I want the guy who eats my burnt toast because he's too polite to complain. I want the dad." She leaned in. I met her halfway. Our foreheads touched, a grounding anchor in the chaos. We breathed in the silence together, laughing softly from sheer relief. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was better. It was the start of something that didn't need a contract to be real. 2 months later, the restaurant was reopened. The plumbing was brand new. The book was actually selling. We hit the local bestseller list thanks to the sprinkler gala going viral. I was in the office, reviewing real contracts this time. Mia was in her flower fort, making cookies out of Play-Doh. Oaklee walked in. She wasn't wearing her chef's coat. She was wearing a dress. "Date night?" I asked, looking up. "Board meeting," she said. "I'm buying them out. With the royalties." Sterling agreed to the settlement. "Nice." She walked over to my desk. She pulled out a paper. "I drafted a new contract," she said. I picked it up. It wasn't a business contract. It was a lease agreement. Joint tenancy. "You want me to stay?" I asked. "Officially? No fake pretense?" "Clause 1, she read, smiling. "Azai Baker agrees to be the permanent taste tester." "Clause 2, I countered, standing up. "Oaklee Torres agrees to no more work calls after 8 p.m. And Sunday is family day." "Agreed," she said. "Clause 3, Mia piped up from the corner. "We need a dog." We both laughed. Oaklee sat on the edge of my desk. I moved into her space. "I love you," she said. I love you too, I said. My red pen sat unused on the desk because, for once, nothing needed fixing. We weren't pretending anymore. We had rewritten the story, and this time, it was a happily ever after.